Hello, everyone. Welcome to 3 News Now. I'm Stephanie Haney. It's Wednesday, January 20th. Thanks for being here for the top stories from WKYC.com and our WKYC app. And today is an historic day in our nation's history. Today is Inauguration Day. Earlier this afternoon, Joe Biden was sworn in as the 46th President of the United States, which is something that happens without fail every 4 years. But the historic moment today came when Vice President Kamala Harris was sworn into office, becoming the first female, the first Black, and the first South Asian person to become Vice President of the United States. From there was much fanfare, even given the situation where the security is ramped up because of what recently happened in Washington, D.C., and the fact that people simply can't be there because of COVID-19 restrictions. And Joe Biden delivered his speech from Washington, D.C., and some of the acts that he expects to take care of today in his first official acts as president. Biden will sign executive orders on a broad range of issues, from the COVID-19 pandemic to climate change and immigration. He'll also be requiring that masks be worn in federal buildings to slow the spread of COVID-19. And he has directed the U.S. to rejoin the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Accord, so really hitting the ground running here on his first day in office. He also says that he'll stop construction of the border wall, which is something we'll talk about in a moment when we talk about former President Trump's last moments in office, and also reverse former President Trump's policies on immigration, which includes that so-called Muslim ban. During Joe Biden's speech today, he said this: "We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, or rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we are willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, for just a moment, stand in their shoes, because here's the thing about life, there's no accounting for what fate will deal you." He went on to say, "My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we are going to need each other. We will need all of our strengths to persevere through this dark winter. We are entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation." The full text of President Biden's inauguration speech, of course, is up on WKYC.com. Now let's turn for a moment to President Donald Trump's last actions overnight and this morning before leaving office. He did depart Washington, D.C. this morning. He was not present at the inauguration, as we did not expect him to be. Former Vice President Mike Pence, however, was present at the inauguration. So, for former President Trump's last actions in office, he pardoned, among other people, former White House advisor Steve Bannon and dozens of others, a total of 143 pardons and commutations in the past day for President Trump. Now, former chief strategist Steve Bannon had been charged with fooling thousands of investors who believed their money would be used to build Trump's border wall. This was part of the We Build the Wall campaign. Now, this is a particularly unusual pardon because this prosecution was still in the early stages. Normally, when you see a pardon like this, you see someone who has already been brought to justice and served some time for their alleged crimes, their convicted crimes at that point. However, not the case with Bannon. That prosecution was very much in its early stages. Nevertheless, Trump pardoned 73 individuals and commuted the sentences of 70 other individuals today. In addition to Bannon, it included several supporters and associates who have been convicted or pleaded guilty to various types of financial crimes. Trump had already pardoned many longtime associates and supporters, including his former campaign chairman Paul Manafort, Charles Kushner, who is the father of his son-in-law, his longtime friend and advisor Roger Stone, and his former national security advisor Michael Flynn. Also, in his last moments in office, the former President Trump revoked a rule that he signed very early in his term that imposed a 5-year lobbying ban on administration officials and a lifetime ban on lobbying for foreign governments. So, under that executive order from former President Trump, that is no longer in effect. And in his last 24 hours in office, the nation hit 400,000 deaths related to COVID-19 before he left Washington, D.C. So that brings us to our latest numbers for the coronavirus coming out of the Ohio Department of Health. We're seeing an increase in the number of cases today from what we've seen over the past couple of days. That number is 6,378 new reported cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. And we look at the daily positive rate. The latest data we have comes from Monday, and that rate is at 13.3% for Monday. And the 7-day average is down. That is at 10%. In the last 24 hours, we have seen an increase in newly reported COVID-19 deaths. That number is at 73. And the total number of people currently in the hospital is now 3,566, which is down. And of those people, 870 are being treated in an intensive care unit. That number also down from what we've seen over the past couple of days. When we take a look at the number of hospital beds available across the state, 26% of the state's hospital beds are available for people who need treatment, whether that's for COVID-19 or for anything else. Now let's take a look at the national and the global numbers for COVID-19. These numbers come from Johns Hopkins University. Across the U.S., there have now been a total of 313,076 reported cases of COVID-19, and over 400,000, that number now at 403,482 reported COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. With 4% of the global population, the U.S. has 25.2% of the COVID-19 cases and 19.5% of the COVID-19 deaths. Those percentages staying steady from yesterday, but we do see them increasing ever so slightly by 1/10 of a percentage point over the past several days. Globally, the total number of reported COVID cases is now at 96,515,416, and the total number of deaths is at 2,066,912. Now, just before President Biden took his oath at the inauguration, he asked the Surgeon General to step down. And this is a resignation that will be coming 8 months early for the current U.S. Surgeon General. He tweeted out that he had been asked to step down by Biden's team, and he said, "It's been the honor of my life to serve this nation, and I will do all I can to ensure everyone has an equal opportunity to achieve and maintain health." Now, this is being done because President Biden has already nominated coronavirus transition advisor Vivek H. Murthy as Surgeon General. Murthy previously served in the same role under President Barack Obama's administration, but was pushed out during the 3rd year of his term when President Trump took office. So you see these offices often changing as the political winds change in Washington, D.C. Now, speaking of the political winds and change, our Ohio lawmakers are reacting to President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris taking office. U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown released a statement today saying that this is such an exciting day and that there is so much to celebrate as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are inaugurated as our next president and vice president. He went on to say their inauguration marks the end of the Trump administration's, quote, phony populism and broken promises, and the beginning of new leadership committed to healing our country and building it back better so it works for everyone, not just those at the top. Democratic Representative Marcia Fudge from Cleveland tweeted today that it's a new day in America, and she shared words from late Representative John Lewis, who has often been called the conscience of Congress. She quoted him saying, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime." Republicans also weighed in, including Republican Representative David Joyce. He tweeted a picture on Tuesday at the Capitol saying that he would attend the inauguration, even though he does not share the same party as President Joe Biden. He said he's proudly attended 4 presidential inaugurations, regardless of whether or not who he voted for is the person who was elected. He went on to say, "As someone who considers it an honor and a privilege to witness a peaceful transition of power, a pillar of our democracy, I will be attending the inauguration," and he was there today. And just for the record, Representative Joyce did support certifying the Electoral College vote. He was not one of the Republican representatives in Ohio that objected to the Electoral College vote back on January 6th. Now, the inauguration was certainly star-studded, with Lady Gaga singing the Star-Spangled Banner, J.Lo performing as well, but someone who really stole the show was the poet Amanda Gorman. She is 22 years old and is now the youngest by far of poets who have read at inaugurations, and she joins the company of the likes of Robert Frost and Maya Angelou. She was the Youth Poet Laureate of Los Angeles at age 16 in 2014 and the first National Youth Poet Laureate just 3 years later in 2017. So in her poem, she referenced Bible scripture and also the words of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. The poem, 6 minutes long, called The Hill We Climb, talking about both work and transcendence in the words of the poem. She started the poem asking, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? And then she used her poetry and her life story as an answer to that question. She said that her plan was to combine a message of hope without ignoring, quote, the evidence of discord and division. She told the Associated Press that her poem was about half done before the events that rocked Washington, D.C. on January 6th. And she said after that, quote, that day gave me a second wave of energy to finish the poem. Now, she didn't mention the events of January 6th specifically, but she referenced them very clearly in the poem. These are the lines there. She said, we've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy, and this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. And she was invited to the inauguration late last month by Dr. Jill Biden, the now current First Lady of the United States, who she had never met before, but was familiar with her work. And that is how she ended up being the youngest poet to read at an inauguration. Lots of people talking about it on social media. Definitely a big moment from today's events. Another thing that's catching everybody's eye from today's events is the fashion of the former First Lady, Michelle Obama. She wore a designer, an emerging black designer, Sergio Hudson, who also partly designed the outfit worn by our now Vice President, Kamala Harris. So Michelle Obama wore a purple-colored turtleneck sweater and trousers and a matching jacket with a gold belt, black leather gloves, and a black mask. And this designer is from South Carolina and has dressed the former First Lady before. Now, as for Vice President Harris's outfit, also in part designed by Hudson, but also Christopher John Rogers, also an emerging black designer out of New Orleans, out of Louisiana, the Baton Rouge area. And she wore a purple dress and a long purple jacket with a black mask. President Joe Biden and the second gentleman, Doug Hamhoff, both wore suits by Ralph Lauren, and Dr. Jill Biden wore an ocean blue wool tweed coat and a dress by an emerging American designer, Alexandria O'Neill of Markarian, and a matching blue mask. So the fashion definitely being talked about, and both the former First Lady and the current Vice President being applauded for choosing designers that are emerging black designers here in the U.S. That's it for your 3 News Now update for Wednesday, January 20th on this Inauguration Day. There are lots more inauguration events coming up that will be streaming on WKYC.com and our WKYC app. You can check our inauguration guide for all of that, including the Parade Across America. That's kicking off at 3 p.m. just momentarily here, so make sure you check that out. And I'll see you next up on What's New at 5 p.m. with a reference to what will a Joe Biden presidency have to do here in Ohio? How will it impact us here in Ohio? My conversation with U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown and Republican strategist Mahek Cook, which you can find on the 3 Things to Know with Stephanie Haney podcast. And then, of course, also, as always, your trending stories. Everyone stay safe and be well, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. I'm Stephanie Haney.